The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as thousands of tourists gathered for the changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd, a small boy named Tommy held tightly to his mother's hand. His eyes were wide with wonder as he watched the tall guards in their red uniforms and black hats, standing perfectly still like statues. Tommy had been dreaming about this trip to London for months. His mother had saved every penny to bring him here for his 8th birthday. She had promised him they would see the real palace guards, just like in the storybooks she read to him every night. The crowd began to push forward as the ceremony started. People with cameras pushed past families, trying to get the perfect shot. Tommy felt his mother's grip loosen as someone bumped into her. In that moment of confusion, with drums beating and people cheering, Tommy looked around and realized something terrible had happened. His mother was nowhere to be seen. The sea of legs and bodies around him seemed to grow taller and scarier with each passing second. Tommy's heart began to race as he spun around, calling out for his mom. But his small voice was completely lost in the noise of the excited crowd. Panic set in as Tommy pushed through the forest of strangers, desperately searching for the familiar face of his mother. Every woman he saw from behind looked like her for a split second, only to turn around and reveal a stranger's face. The palace that had seemed so magical just moments before now felt cold and frightening. The royal guards continued their ceremony, their faces hidden beneath their tall black hats, their expressions unreadable. To Tommy, they looked more like scary giants than the friendly protectors from his storybooks. Tears began to well up in his eyes as the reality of being lost in a foreign country started to sink in. As the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, Tommy found himself standing alone in the middle of the courtyard. The laughter and chatter of other families only made him feel more isolated. He clutched his small backpack tighter and looked around desperately, hoping to catch even a glimpse of his mother's blue coat. But she was gone, and Tommy was completely alone. Tommy's bottom lip began to tremble as tears rolled down his cheeks. The courtyard, which had been packed with people just minutes ago, now seemed eerily quiet. A few tourists lingered, taking photos, but most had moved on to other parts of the palace grounds, standing near the palace gates. Tommy felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He remembered his mother's warnings about staying close and not talking to strangers, but now he didn't know what to do. Should he stay in one place and wait? Should he try to find help? His 80-year-old mind couldn't decide. The tears came faster now, and soon Tommy was crying openly. His sobs echoed off the stone walls of the ancient palace. He wiped his nose with his sleeve and looked around desperately, hoping his mother would suddenly appear and scoop him up in her arms like she always did when he was scared a group of tourists walked by. Chatting loudly in a language Tommy didn't understand, they glanced at him briefly but kept walking. Another family passed, the parents busy taking selfies while their children ran ahead. Nobody seemed to notice the small boy crying alone by the palace. Walls. Tommy's cries grew louder as his fear turned to desperation. He began to call out for his mother, his voice cracking with emotion. "Mom, Mom, where are you?" he shouted. But his words seemed to disappear into the vast open space of the courtyard. Just when Tommy thought nobody would ever notice him, he heard heavy footsteps approaching. Through his tears, he saw a pair of large black boots stopping right in front of him. Slowly, Tommy looked up to see one of the royal guards standing there, towering above him like a gentle giant. The guard's red uniform was pristine, and his tall black hat cast a shadow over his face. But when Tommy looked into the man's eyes, he saw something unexpected. Instead of the stern, cold expression he had imagined all royal guards must have, he saw kindness and concern. The guard slowly knelt down to Tommy's level, his movements careful and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was gentle and warm, nothing like the intimidating figure Tommy had expected. "Hello there, little one," he said softly. "What's got you so upset?" Tommy looked up at the guard through his tears, surprised by the man's gentle voice. The guard's name tag read Sergeant Williams, and despite his imposing uniform, his eyes were kind and patient. Tommy had expected to be in trouble for crying so loudly near the palace, but instead he felt a spark of hope. "I can't find my mom," Tommy sniffled, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "We were watching the ceremony, and there were so many people. And then she was gone." His voice broke as he spoke. The fear and confusion evident in every word, Sergeant Williams nodded understandingly. He had been a royal guard for 15 years, and in that time he had seen many lost children. But something about this little boy tugged at his heart. Perhaps it was the way Tommy clutched his small backpack, or the brave way he was trying to stop crying now that an adult was talking to him. "That must be very scary," Sergeant Williams said, his voice remaining calm and reassuring. "But you know what? You did the right thing by staying in one place. That makes it much easier for your mom to find you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, offering it to Tommy. Tommy accepted the handkerchief gratefully and blew his nose. "Are you really a royal guard?" he asked, his curiosity momentarily overcoming his fear. Despite his situation, he was still amazed to be talking to one of the famous guards he had seen in pictures. "I certainly am," Sergeant Williams smiled. "I've been guarding this palace for a very long time, and part of my job is making sure everyone who visits here is safe and happy. That includes making sure little boys find their mothers." He stood up slowly and extended his hand to Tommy. "What's your name, young man?" "Tommy," the boy replied, taking the guard's large hand in his small one. "Tommy Henderson. We're from America. My mom saved up for a whole year so we could come here for my birthday." Sergeant Williams felt his heart warm at the boy's innocence and the obvious love between him and his mother. He made a mental note of Tommy's last name and began formulating a plan to help reunite them. "Well, Tommy Henderson from America, I think it's time we found your mother. Would you like to help me look for her?" Tommy's eyes lit up with hope as he nodded eagerly. Sergeant Williams kept hold of his hand and began walking toward the Palace Information Center. As they walked, the guard asked Tommy questions about his mother to help identify her. "Can you tell me what your mom looks like?" Sergeant Williams asked gently. "What was she wearing today?" Tommy scrunched up his face, trying to remember every detail. "She has brown hair like mine, but longer. And she's wearing a blue coat, her favorite one. Oh, and she has a big camera around her neck because she wanted to take lots of pictures of everything." His voice grew stronger as he focused on helping the kind. "Guard, that's very helpful." "Tommy, you're being very brave," Sergeant Williams praised. Noticing how the boy's confidence was returning, "Is there anything else special about your mom that might help us spot her?" Tommy thought for a moment. "She has a white purse with little flowers on it. And she walks really fast because she says there's so much to see and not enough time." Despite his worry, Tommy smiled a little when he talked about his mother's enthusiasm for their trip. As they approached the information center, Sergeant Williams spotted his colleague, Guard Peterson, who was already speaking with a frantic-looking woman in a blue coat. The woman was gesturing wildly and appeared to be crying. Sergeant Williams felt his pulse quicken. This might be Tommy's mother. "Tommy," he said softly, stopping for a moment, "I want you to look over there by that building. Do you see a lady in a blue coat talking to another guard?" Tommy followed the direction of Sergeant Williams' gaze and immediately let out a gasp. "Mom," he shouted, his voice filled with pure joy and relief. "That's my mom. That's her." Without waiting for permission, Tommy started running toward his mother, but Sergeant Williams gently caught his arm. "Hold on there, young man. Let's walk over together. I'm sure your mother is very worried. We don't want to startle her, but it was too late to worry about startling anyone." Tommy's mother, Sarah, had heard her son's voice and turned around. When she saw Tommy holding hands with the royal guard, her face transformed from despair to overwhelming relief and gratitude. "Tommy!" Sarah cried out, dropping to her knees and opening her arms wide. Tommy ran to her and threw himself into her embrace, both of them crying tears of relief and joy. Sarah held her son tightly, as if she never wanted to let him go again. "Oh, my baby. I was so scared," Sarah whispered into Tommy's hair. "I looked everywhere for you. When I turned around and you weren't there, I thought I would never see you again." Her voice shook with emotion as she pulled back to look at his face, checking to make sure he was really okay. "I was scared too, Mom," Tommy admitted, his arms wrapped tightly around her neck. "But Sergeant Williams helped me. He was really nice, and he said his job was to make sure I found you." Tommy turned to point proudly at the guard who had become his. Hero Sarah looked up at Sergeant Williams with tears streaming down her face. She stood up, still holding Tommy's hand, and approached the guard. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I realized he was gone, I felt like my whole world had collapsed. You didn't just help me find my son, you probably saved my life too." Sergeant Williams removed his hat respectfully as he spoke to Sarah. "Ma'am, there's no need to thank me. Any parent would have done the same if they found a child in need. Tommy here was very brave and very smart. He stayed in one place and was able to give me all the information I needed to help find you." Guard Peterson, who had been helping Sarah search, smiled at the reunion. "Your son is quite special, ma'am. He described you perfectly, down to the white purse with flowers and your blue coat. He clearly loves you very much." Sarah squeezed Tommy's hand and smiled through her tears. "We love each other very much. This trip to London was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, and I almost ruined it by losing him in the crowd." She shook her head. Still overwhelmed by what had just happened, "You didn't ruin anything." "Mom," Tommy said firmly, looking up at her with complete trust and love. "Sergeant Williams told me that getting lost happens sometimes, but the important thing is that we found each other. And now I have an even better story to tell everyone back home." Sergeant Williams knelt down one more time to speak to Tommy at eye level. "You know, Tommy, you've taught me something important today, too. Sometimes the best part of this job isn't guarding the palace or performing ceremonies. Sometimes it's helping people like you and your mother." Tommy beamed with pride and reached into his small backpack. He pulled out a small toy soldier, one of his most prized possessions that he had brought from home. "I want you to have this," he said, offering it to Sergeant Williams, "so you can remember me and how you helped me find my mom." The seasoned guard, who had maintained his composure through countless formal ceremonies and official events, felt his eyes mist over as he accepted the small gift. "I will treasure this always, Tommy, and I will never forget the brave little boy from America who reminded me why I love my job." Sarah watched this exchange with a full heart. She asked Guard Peterson if she could take a photo of Tommy with Sergeant Williams, and both guards happily agreed. As she snapped the picture, she knew this would become one of their most precious memories from the trip. "Will you be here tomorrow?" Tommy asked hopefully. "We're staying in London for 3 more days. I'll be here," Sergeant Williams promised. "And if you come back to visit, you make sure to wave at me during the ceremony. I'll be watching for you." As Sarah and Tommy prepared to continue their tour of London, they both turned back to wave at the guards who had helped them. Sergeant Williams stood tall and proud, but he gave Tommy a small, private wave that only the boy could see, walking away hand in hand. Tommy looked up at his mother and said, "Mom, I thought the guards were just for show, but they're real heroes, aren't they?" Sarah smiled and squeezed his hand. "Yes, sweetheart. Real heroes come in many forms. Sometimes they wear shining armor, and sometimes they wear red uniforms and tall black hats. But they all have one thing in common. They have kind hearts, and they help others when they're needed most." From that day forward, whenever Tommy felt scared or lost, he would remember Sergeant Williams and the lesson he learned at the palace. There are always good people willing to help. And sometimes the most unexpected heroes are the ones who make the biggest difference in our lives.